Okay, hi all. Yeah, as I said on the tweet, this is the first time we're doing this, so inevitably there'll be some technical problems and things not being set up ideally. So first of all, can people hear me? Right. God, the latency with chat is slightly annoying. I'll have to get used to this. Just continuing on, and then chat will be like, I don't know, 30 seconds behind or something. So yeah. Okay. Right. Yeah, so the whole thing crashed before. Is it still up? Weirdly, YouTube crashed rather than the streaming software this time. Okay, alright, cool. So yeah, again, I find this very hard to get used to, that it's not like an audio call. So, all right. So yeah, as I said in the tweets, now that Explosion's been sort of smaller over the last year or so, I've been getting back into a sort of rhythm as just sort of individual maintainers, and it's hard to keep that up in the same way. So I think it'll be helpful to start streaming this, and I hope it'll also help the community participate more in the library development, decision making around it, and things like that. So if there are people who are interested enough, they can join, or at least review periodically, and they can have some involvement in the library development. I think this. I like the idea of this model more than this sort of discussions and pull requests thing, because the responsibilities are always a bit unclear. If you're saying, okay, somebody will take on a pull request, and then there's this reviewing back and forth. There's people. I think it's not reasonable for people to have sort of firm promises on when they can complete certain work, because they have other duties as well. And this way people can, the community can, discuss around the priorities and what's going on, and they can see some of the, the decision they can participate in the decision-making process, or at least understand why I'm going to do things a certain way, or, what the considerations are. So, as a sort of general update, one of the things that I've been doing at the moment is actually really boring. There's these ongoing problems with the CI, specifically the build process around the Cython Bliss library, which is our linear algebra routines library. We vendor this third-party library called Bliss for that, and that allows us to link to it at the C level, so that we can call it from our Cython code. Whereas if we were using something like just the NumPy routines, then we can't access those from C in the same way, just access a matrix multiplication call. We've also liked having our own version of those things, because it means that we get control of making sure that they run the same on different platforms. So we get to say, all right, we get control of the threading, for instance, where otherwise you can have different performance characteristics on different platforms, and also just in some situations crashing in some processes because of different threading modules. The problem at the moment is I updated we've been on an old version of this vended Bliss library, and so I wanted to update it from v0.7 to v0.9, or ultimately to like the current v1 that it's there at the moment. So in the repo, we had a branch which was updated to v0.9, which Daniel and Adrian had worked on as well. So I was like, okay, cool, I'll get this released. I needed to do a new release for the NumPy 2 changes to get our stuff up to date with NumPy 2. And so I did a release of that, and what I didn't realize is that actually the v0.9 has bugs in it, which Adrian and Daniel and Manish had gone through a lot of those bugs, but they hadn't gotten all of them. And so they ultimately rolled back to v0.7. And so I didn't realize that the v0.9 that I released also had some. So currently the release that's there at the moment has some of these bugs on Windows, and so it is some crashes on Windows on the using the current version of Bliss that I've got released. So I'm like, okay, I need to do a new release that either rolls back to v0.7 or rolls forward to v1. So over the last couple of days, and actually even before this, I've been working on getting it built for v0.1 for the 1.0 version, and this is difficult. I've been transitioning the build system from Azure Pipelines, where it was building before, to GitHub Actions, and the Windows compilation hasn't been working on GitHub Actions for this, and I haven't been able to figure out exactly what was different in the environments there. So finally, last night I got it compiling for the 1.0 version, but it crashed with this time actually crashing all the time with these floating point exceptions. Which means that there's a divide by 0 somewhere in the maths. So I think, so I've gone, all right, let's roll back to the v0.7, and at the moment this isn't compiling in the current compiler toolchain that's on GitHub Actions. So I need to figure out what to do about that. It's an issue of some headers being drawn in at the and a conflict between this CPUID.h and intrins.h on Windows. So I need to solve that problem and then finally get Cycling Bliss built, and then I can update, I can do another round of releases on spaCy and the other libraries that actually are compatible across both NumPy 1 and NumPy 2, which will help some of the build problems that people have had and the dependency problems that people have had. So all of that's this sort of background work. I don't want to live stream that because it's, well, as I said, it's super boring and there's a lot of waiting because the Cycling Bliss takes a long time to compile and it takes a while for jobs to start on the CI. So what tends to happen is I'll make some sort of some guest change to try to align the versions, maybe change the compiler version, something like this. And then I'll push that out, trigger the CI, and then wait 10 minutes for something to fail, and then not really know what to try next, try something else, and basically, do this sort of debugging. And because it's on a Windows failure on the CI, there's not really an easy way to do it locally to see what's going on. While that's in general for these streams, I want to do just whatever I'm doing on the library or what I'm doing on the open source. But for these first streams, I can't bring myself to do a stream of like wrestling with CI build problems. So I thought instead I wanted to talk about one of the things that I've had in mind for spaCy improvements, and I think there's having some distance from the development that we did on v3. One of the things that's been bothering me about the library for a while and that I'm looking to improve is that I can sort of talk you through the thought process there and get some ideas on how you're feeling about this as well. So let's hopefully switch over to this other view. Okay, so this should have a view of the terminal and then also just some notes in. Let me just also bring that up for myself. Yeah. So yeah, okay. So yeah, we should have the terminal viewing up. So first of all, is the text large enough to be read here, or do I need to do some adjustments? Ah, I had the chat view on the wrong thing. I had it set to only top chat, so yes, I see. Great. Sweet. All right. So the problem that I'm interested in solving is, let me see if let me just go to, all right. So let's say we do import spaCy. At the moment, the API in V2, in V3 is very centered around the config. And I think it's actually a bit unideal how much we do in strings and string names and stuff rather than normal functions. And in particular, the way that the defaults work, we did the defaults a certain way to achieve a set of trade-offs. And I think there are definitely benefits to that. But at the same time, I think that there's downsides. And now that more people are using, IDE supported editors, I think not having the defaults show up as sort of function arguments is a shame at the moment. And when I've been using spaCy, it's made things a little bit harder than I would like to do. So let's say we can do something like this, right? We can do spaCy load. Let me just, yeah, okay. So, so yeah, we do that, and now let's say we want to add a tagger, or actually let's do a blank NLP model. All right, so this is our NLP container. If we look at it in spaCy, the language class is over here. All right, so we've got our language thing, and then the way that this works, when you go, when you do something like nlp.addPipe, we call that according to this factory name. So we call it like a tagger, and then that key string is looked up, and there's a factory that the specifics of it actually depend on the language subclass, so that you can get a different tagger if you've got, say the Chinese language as opposed to the English one. So all of that's quite nice, and it creates it with defaults. And then if we want to add different, if we want to change those defaults, we can. But usually when people are doing this, they are just creating sort of a default tag. So let's go to the tagger here, and we registered this language.factory. This is where we've registered this name, this string tagger, and we've got this around this function make tagger. So as I said, there's advantages and disadvantages of these approaches, and one of the things that's good about the way that we've done this is it maps very neatly to loading the things back from disk. So all of these defaults and things are there on disk. We know when you've got an NLP object, it's always in a state where you can write it at the disk and be able to load it back later. The downside that I see here is it's all well and good. We can go say this like nlp.addPipe tagger, but it still feels it's hard not to want to be able to do something like even if it's a different name, add an object, because there's currently no easy way to do that. Let's say I've got some function that expresses some processing that I want to do. So let's see, we can go process doc, or I don't know, add hello world, and so this will be so we want to make this just some function that's going to work on the docs, and however we want to wrap this, and it's fine if this has to be a subclass, if if there's any other sort of bureaucracy that we need to do to make it work in spaCy. I feel like I should be able to add this as a process on the pipeline. Instead, what we have to do is, and this is all described in the docs, but basically what we have to do here is wrap this as a factory ourselves, so that we go at language.factory and we give it like this string name, and then we add that string name. So if we go to the language.factory class, we can just factory All right. So yeah, we've got this. We register a new pipeline component factory, and we can do it in a function or a class method, and then yeah, factory provided as the func keyword argument. So. All right. Yeah. So I think this would be. So yeah, I need to look up again exactly how to do this on the current system, but it's something like this. So actually, I'll just make this clearer. So we'd go. And then right. So that's what we would have to do at the moment in order to get a custom component on there. And I find this a bit indirect. I also think it's a bit unfortunate when you're programming via these config things that you're doing everything via these strings, and when you're looking at the code, you don't know the mapping of where those things are in the code, or like what function that actually calls. I think having more things actually route through the normal Python process would, in many use cases, actually be better. So we want to keep the config stuff working the way that it does as an option, but I want to improve the support of just programming directly with Python APIs, and if somebody doesn't want to worry about the config, that you're able to use the library in this way. You just assemble a pipeline in code the way that you want it, with adding objects rather than referring to objects via strings. And when you serialize the NLP object, you would it would know that it's got these objects which it can't reconstruct. So what you would have to do to load it back is set up the NLP object the way that you did before, and then load in data from it. So you would have some sort of function that is something like, create my NLP object, that would return a language instance, and this would be in your code, and you would this is where you would do your setup. And type obj or something like this, and then you would return your NLP. And for serialization, all that you have to do is just make sure that you've got the same module here on each side of your serialization. So you've got this module when you create your NLP object and when you train it or like do anything else, and then what you're actually saving out is data from it. And in order to load that data back in, you've got to set up your pipeline the same way with these functions. The way that it works at the moment instead is, if you've got custom code, you wrap that up as an extension. That extension registers an additional entry points, and those entry points provide these string names, so that in code you're able to then load things up, and it's able to find all of your extensions where you had them. So again, this works great, but if to me, in many situations, if on either side of the training you have to get your custom code loaded on the other side, I think in many situations it's actually going to be just as easy to to say, all right, well, the custom code that I have is this code that sets up my language object and returns it. What you don't get from these things is the ability to have an arbitrary set of your extensions in NLP and then be able to get some model. You don't know which one it is, you don't know what language it is, what pipeline it is, and just load it. So in those situations, the current config situation setup is still going to be best. But for the simplest sort of situations where you just say, well, look, I'm just programming, I want to create something, manipulate it in code, use it in code, and then later on, I've got the code that runs, directly. I think having everything sort of work with normal objects would be better, rather than this sort of string typing or string, referencing. So this is what I want to do. One of the in order to do this, it's not as simple as just adding a method that says add a pipe by object. So that's something which we can do, and there's actually a PR that I've got, a draft PR which I opened a while ago, where there's some discussion of this with Sophie. In order to actually get this to work well, what we have to do, let's say we've got the tagger. So at the moment, let's say I go to create a tagger object. This doesn't take any defaults, and we did that quite intentionally because before spaCy 3, in spaCy 2, we had defaults at many layers of the API, and this was a real problem. So the reason why you end up with defaults at many layers of the API is it is a tree of objects, and that's very fundamental. There's no way that we could make it not a tree of objects. You've got the language object, and you want to know from there how to create a tagger, but then so you might have defaults at that layer, and then the next layer down is like the tagger class. You might have different, subclasses or different configurations of that. So you might have some defaults there, and then it has arguments which are objects as well. So for instance, this model object, if you want to have some sort of default there, you've got to have some way of providing those defaults. And in fact, the model is where most of the interesting defaults will be expressed. So what we had before is these defaults coming in at all of these different layers. And if you wanted to change some hyperparameter, you weren't really sure where in the tree that default was coming in. And it was actually very difficult to make sure that at no point did you clobber some set of defaults that are happening higher up. So what we've got instead is the defaults are expressed in the config files here in the code, and then you've got this make tagger factory, and it's got its default config there as an argument of the factory. But this means that if we're trying to reform how things are working in the actual APIs, then let's say we go to from spaCy.tagger, import, make tagger, right? So here we go, and I'll say, right, let's call this make tagger function. What's it? What's its signature? So I'm not actually. I need to actually make a quick change here so that I'm getting. Okay, so I'm not immediately sure why this doesn't give me any entry helping. But regardless, let's say, you know, in my editor, I'm getting like, you know, some signature there. Maybe this is actually even a separate problem with, so do we have a clear site? So we actually don't have a declaration for this as well. So this is another thing. Some of, for stuff like this, we've got these PYI files, but I guess these things like the tagger are considered internals at the moment. So there's actually no PYI file declaring the type interface for this. So you know, when you're using an IDE, you're also not getting any support there from this. And that's another thing which, as a sort of general theme of what I want to do in the library, is I want to make it more just better to use with current tooling and current API, current IDE tooling. So when I initially developed the library, this felt like less of a concern. You know, this was going back to like 2014. Visual Studio Code wasn't there. Some people were using things like PyCharm, but overall, most people were using pretty limited tooling for Python, because the language services that were around that you could use in a language were like, there was this language server called Rope, which barely worked. I, you know, used it a little bit, but it really was pretty rough. Now the situation around this is different, and I think almost all developers are using this sort of type support, especially now that the type features in Python are just much better. So I think that across our stack, there's not good enough support for these things, and it's actually Cython does make it, like, you know, really quite difficult because we've got type annotations at the C level that express things about you know, the C types, and those types don't map one-to-one with what we need to say what we need to tell users about the Python API. The C structures are not the same as what you'll have as you know, type annotations for the Python usage. It just means that we end up having to have a separate declaration file that we have to keep in sync. So if we have it basically looks something like this, and there's sort of ongoing problems with this falling out of sync or being incorrect, and we don't have any, you know, automated way of generating these things. I think what we need instead is just if we can have better tests which detect these things going out of date, like for instance walking an object and checking whether there's anything which isn't here or something like that. I think that would be a step forward. But yeah, I had hoped that migrating to Cython 3, where we would express more of the Cython types in type annotations, would help. But you know, then things would be in Cython 3, you can do everything with decorators, and you basically make it like, you know, Python files rather than these PYX files. And then we'd also have better editor support within the library development. Unfortunately, the spaCy doesn't currently compile properly with Cython 3. We do a bunch of stuff with C++ that's a kind of fringe use cases for Cython, and it doesn't work with Cython 3 at the moment. So we're not able to do that. Well, actually it works with Cython 3, but it doesn't work in the pure Python mode. So we can't use this pure Python mode to make it easier to generate these things. So I'll have to basically just add these PYI files as we go. All right. So aside from the fact that we're not getting any entry helping at all, let's imagine that we did get that. You know, we go and add this function to a PYI file, and we're able to get this from in the editor. So, I go and type this and I get, like, as I normally would, the arguments for it. Now, those arguments are not very useful. They don't express the defaults to me because all they do is they say, okay, this function needs to take the NLP object, it needs to take a name, and then it takes some sort of model. The information of what the default tagger model actually is not expressed within the function. It's expressed in this, this code up here. So what I want to do is, and then there's the question of how do we make sure that if we express any defaults in here, that they stay aligned in here. So my idea to solve this is actually to express the defaults within the function arguments and build this config dynamically. So we'll inspect the arguments for the functions, get the defaults that they declare, and then from there we'll construct the model config string dynamically. This means that when you view the code, you won't be able to view this block of string. Instead, you'll be reading the function arguments here, but I think that this is better. I think it has to be that, we, the ability of developers to just develop with the code and have it work as normal code with, like, there's a function with defaults that you can call, and you can just call this function and create a tagger. I think that's something that the library has to achieve, and it's something that we're currently losing. So yeah, this goes sort of all the way down. We've got the model object there, and then if we go into ML, got models, and here's this build tagger model, which I think is the default. No, it's a spaCy tagger v2. So yeah, that's this one. So this again is something where this is this string, and we have some sort of extension in VS Code that lets you look these things up, but we shouldn't be having to reinvent these things. If I want to know where this default thing is defined, that should be something that's just I'm looking that up in the editor or in code. It should just be this function that I'm sort of tracking down, rather than a string that could be anywhere, including it could be in somebody else, some other module entirely that's actually coming in. So that's the name of this architecture overall, and then that takes another function for the model architecture, which is this spaCy hash embed CNN. For the TokDevec. So then I've got to, then if I want to understand that, this is another thing which I've got to just be able to look up, right? So I think we have this in our models. TokDevec. And if we look at that there, yeah. So this is where we have this hash embed CNN v2. And again, this guy doesn't have any defaults, because the concept behind it is, all right, well, the tagger and everything will have different defaults for these things, and so it doesn't know how it should be defaulted. That's the job of the tagger, or ultimately the thing that's creating it, in order to pass those things down. In practice, I think this is actually pretty. In most of the situations, this is pretty impractical. If you want to be able to call these functions themselves, they should own at least some defaults, and then things can override those defaults as they go. So yeah, I would say that we would have these. So yeah, let me think how this should work. So if these express defaults here, and then we've got some function above it that is calling that, then I guess when we're doing the inspection, we have to go down into that that function. So yeah, maybe these lower functions shouldn't have their defaults, and we should be doing this at least this tagger level. So yeah, if you're creating at least a pipeline component, then you don't have to specify all the defaults. They've got some like default things to make a tagger. But when you're creating these sort of models, maybe those ones don't should get defaults. The alternative is to actually just give these defaults that you know, then it's up to the tagger and stuff to actually provide all these arguments. This is something that we moved away from in V3, but maybe it's something that should be revisited, just because it does lead to this you know, sort of lack of practicality in the Python API. So yeah. All right. So first of all, are there any thoughts from chat about, like, you know, how does has anybody else experienced this about a library that you wish that the Python API were sort of more regular, or that it worked, like, you know, that you didn't have to do everything via the config? This is it's sent me back to the top chat, not live. Okay, yeah. Make sure that I'm getting this correct. Okay. Can somebody say something in chat so that I can see whether it's whether I'm actually getting chat? Because yeah, I'm not sure whether it's fine if the chat is just okay, good. All right. So yeah, okay, cool. All right. So as I said, there's this sort of design problem around this. Let me try to load up the previous discussion of this as well, so that we can I'll just get this up on from the issue tracker. All right. So. Right. Yeah. Okay. So now, awkwardly, the streaming software has been crashing when I try to get it to show just a browser. So I've had to make it actually do whole screen sharing, which is kind of unpleasant, but let me just transition over to that. Okay, so I hope people are able to see the browser here. I can't easily, bring up the chat window and stuff, but this is an issue where I was sort of sketching this out and wanted to see how to get this basically get this working. So yeah, this is what I want to be able to do. I want to create the instances from add pipe instance, and then Sophie mentions these issues with the defaults, and this is kind of where things have left off with this, because there were essentially this bunch of design questions which I haven't revisited at that point. So let me just switch back over to Terminal plus Camera. Yeah. So yeah, this is, I guess I should pause as well, just in a second. Are there things which people wanted to, like, specifically to look at, or any bugs? If you've, if you're, so are there any things which you would particularly like to see developed or changed in the library? Is this just a thing that bothers me, or what? Does anybody in chat have an idea for, like, what they would prioritize for this? Okay. All right. So yeah, I'll look at this branch for the feed pipe instances. So yeah, going for this. Yeah. What was it? Add pipe instances, right? Oh, instance. Okay. All right, so yeah, here's how it was working for this. Got this function add pipe instance, and right. So I guess this is a good start, like at least getting, so there's this question of the defaults and stuff later, but for now, let's just focus on this. So I'll look at the remaining problems that we have in the PR. So, yeah. Okay, so all right. Alright, so this is what we had. So add a component instance to the processing pipeline. Valid components are callables to take a doc object, modify it, and return it. Only one or before, after, first, last can be set. Default behavior is last. The limitation of this method is that spaCy will not know how to reconstruct your pipeline after you save it out, unlike the language pipe method, where you provide a config and let spaCy construct the instance. So yeah, this is also limited to these callables. So does so yeah, this is limited to, or is it actually limited to this? I'm thinking about things like the pipe method, right? So if we look in NLP like language.pipe, this is called. Okay, so we've got this calls into this underscore pipe. Right, so there's, I forgot that this is all made much more complicated by the support for multiprocessing. But yeah, the way this actually works is you've got this, it calls into like the component.pipe. So I'm wondering whether, whether everything will work well if you add like a component instance rather than just a callable, and I think it will. So I think this method that we had there will work for both. So we've got add pipeline instance, pipe instance. All right. So I'll just flip back to the PR here. Again, it's slightly awkward that I can't easily share the browser. This is something I'll have to fix for next stream. But I want to just look at the current comments on this. So yeah. So yeah, one of the other open questions around this was whether we should overload this function add pipe and just have it say, well, you can use add pipe and you can add either a name of a component factory, or you can add the component itself. Yeah, in general, like this sort of overloading can be good. It can, sort of just do what you mean. But I think for simplicity, to kind of keep things more literal, especially since it's, there's a lot of existing code with this, I think it's better to just make it a different method. So we say, okay, add pipe instance for this, and then yeah, okay, so index, so insert and pipe component. So the question is whether this should actually call into add pipe instance, because it would be logical to first create the pipe here and then call ourselves into add pipe instance. So let's see what we do here. But we've got these other things about the meta and stuff like this. So yeah, if we're keeping these separate, then we can just do it like this, and that's fine. So yeah. looking back at the DR. Okay, so it looks like for this part the main thing to do is to add this to the docs. And then this part of it would be complete, where we'd just have this function which lets us add these instances to it. And then the next part would be trying to deal with the defaults. So let's have a look at the docs here. So we've got websites, docs, then API language. So So yeah, if anyone's wondering, this is the way that we've always done the docs for spaCy. We don't use a generator because this allows us to have better control of how things are described, and potentially have things diverge a little bit from in just like what documentation you provide within the code, and then what documentation is actually relevant to the user. So yeah, so for now, let's see, we need to synchronize this with this. So we're saying processing pipeline by factory model config. That change, what's wrong? Okay, so in this case, I think taking this stuff from here is better. So using component or language factory. Okay, that's fine. Alright, so then. Yeah, so this is actually it's unclear what we would have in this change. So this is this change that we had in V3 where it doesn't take callables anymore. So what I'm saying is that, like, okay, we should restore some way of adding callables. I think that it would be reasonable to remove this info box at this point if we're saying that, you know, if we've got the other note there as well. Okay, and then we would have the equivalent for add pipe instance. So let's say, Actually, this wouldn't work the same way because if we were just going to, and this is actually one of the traps that I suppose should be in the docs. This looks like it would almost like it should work, right? Get pipe NER. But this would, and in many situations this would work okay, but it's actually quite tricky because the language object assumes that all of the components within it have the same vocab object, and this means that all of the strings are being encoded in the same place, and we don't have these sort of mixings of things. So if you but if you did it this way, the vocab of that NER object is a different instance than the one which you're loading. And, so let's say you unload this second NLP object, you actually have to keep its vocab in memory because it's referenced in this second doc object. And just in general, you can get there'll be a number of sort of strange edge cases because this assumption that's in the library that if you've got a collection of documents that were produced by the same pipeline, that they all have the same vocab object, that won't apply here. So I think I actually have a check for this in this to make sure that, so let's see. So I thought I was doing something here to double check that the vocab instance is the same. So it should be possible to do something like this. At a instance vocab and do we have here a component? Yeah. Right, so, and then I guess the question here is whether this should be a warning or whether it should be a hard error. I suppose, it's reasonable to let people insist on doing this if they know that they don't care and they just want this to work. They can, and they're happy to live with the consequences. Then maybe this should actually be a warning instead. Yeah. So yeah. Okay. So to answer the question of like why it can be a stir or an int, if you're adding the before for this before and after, so you can say, all right, add it like after the first one, whichever the one that is. So I want this to be second in the processing pipeline, and I don't necessarily know what the first entry in the pipeline is. So it seemed reasonable, like you're doing insertion in a list, to have that functionality and say, okay, I want this to be there. And then the first and last, it would be possible to do something like this with just numbers, but it's sort of confusing, and so we ended up with this system of saying, you can have before and after, or like the first and last as the options. Yeah. Yeah, okay, so let's look at these errors, because I think that's the only part of this that then needs to be done. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, for the errors and warnings, we have these lists here. Geez, I forgot how many of these we actually have. So yeah, the reason that we do this is if the error strings are actually located within the code, there's always this kind of pressure to keep the errors sort of short, or to not like clutter things. It's also more difficult to make the errors kind of like consistent with each other, because they're all scattered across the code base. Instead we have these error codes, and then it also means that you can sort of search them up. One thing that I would like to do potentially for v4 or like a future version is, I think it's a shame that we raised the generic Python errors, like value error, because if you're doing a try except, you then have to just catch value error, which means that if there's any other bug somewhere else, there's also going to be a value error, which is unideal. So even if we did nothing but make spaCy raise its own error class, like its own value error and its own other ones, I think that would actually be helpful to people, just for try accepts. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, so having it as a list like that, we thought of having something like nlp.append or something like this, but the downside of having the APIs that generic is that it then becomes awkward if there are extra arguments on it, which we do want. So if you're going to have a function like append or extend or something like that, I think that function should have exactly the same signature as it does on a list, and it should really match that behavior pretty identically. So we're going to, whereas here we very immediately need other arguments here. And in fact, there's a lot of times in spaCy where we use operators, and those are nice, looking things up or like adding things and stuff. But this is also something that we can easily come to regret, because if you're able to add something just via an operator, then we don't have the opportunity to add anything else to it, like any arguments that sort of add some complexity there. So we end up with a second method that does the same thing as the operator but allows more arguments, which is just a bit unfortunate. Okay, so I don't know how to write the error messages, by the way. This is something that Ines always has a knack for. So maybe maybe my error messages will get changed in review again. Okay, so here we go. Error starts E1056. Yeah. Oh, okay. Oh, right. Yeah, I forgot we put this in a sort of structure. Okay. All right, and yeah, we don't need to pass anything in, so just that. Then name in component names. Yeah, that's already there. Then okay, how do we do warnings? I always forget this. So warnings. Okay, let's look for usage of this within spaCy. Alright, so spaCy init. Okay, warnings.warn and then no. Alright. someday Pyrite will be smart enough to know that this that this is reasonable after the hazard check. Okay, and then is the type right? The pipe callable. Yeah, so that says it's like either a pipe or a callable, and yeah, and then we're returning it as well. Yeah. Okay. So it's sort of an open question whether doing this sort of thing, there should be a like sort of equivalent support of doing this by instance. For here, I'll say no and just add this as add pipe instance. You can achieve this like replace pipe functionality yourself. This is kind of a convenience, but using like remove pipe and that sort of stuff. So I don't feel like it makes a lot of sense to do this as to do this with the pipe instances as well. And yeah, remove pipe only makes sense here. Disable pipe. These are all things which have to be within the pipeline to apply, so we don't have the same sort of issue. So, yeah, okay. Yeah, so sure, you could have the Akash, you could have the like replace pipe 2 and things like that, but just we don't have to support all combinations of things. And I think in general, the need to like replace exactly pipe 2, even though you don't know what next that is, it feels a bit niche. So instead, you can just like find the index like this or some other way. So yeah. Same with renaming and stuff. You don't get a function to rename pipe 2. All right. Okay, so I think that answers the stuff that was in the thread. We needed to add documentation. We did that to the API docs. Now there's a question of like whether we should have this in the usage docs. Yeah, I'm just reading the PR again. So. Okay, actually, so according to this, I actually have had something, had an error like this, so I had warning 126. Oh, yeah, I should have read this, it goes immediately just above. So where did I have this? Instantiated vocab. Right, okay, so this is the other part of this where the PR, so that's, right, so I'll just use this. Yeah, so the other part of the functionality that we're adding here, let's say that you do want to load it back. What we have here is the ability to say these are pipe instances. So when you're doing spaCy.load, if you're loading a pipeline where you did provide some things as pipe instances, you can provide those as just a dictionary. So and this answers the problem that you would have where and in fact the reason why we have the whole config system is when you load things back, like if you've just added an object, there's no way for spaCy to know how to reconstruct that object. Like the objects can't be so self-describing that they tell you which function was used to create them or that sort of stuff, because they're mutable, they have arbitrary state. So yeah, there's not necessarily a function which creates an arbitrary object that you've added to the pipeline. So what we have, that's why we have these whole registered factories registered by name, etc. But if you do want to call spaCy.load and you've added some of these pipe instances, well, you can just provide a dictionary of them. So that's what we've got here. So yeah, in spaCy.load, you can call this, and then we need to update the doc string here. Alright, so then we would have to go to the API docs and docs API. So then spaCy.load, go. Actually, I think there was a complaint earlier on that this example is wrong, right? It should just be something like this. Because we shouldn't have that example was saying like what this thing does, but yeah, the very basic thing to have as the example is like it's there. So I think it's reasonable to have that instead. So. Okay. All right. Yeah, so I think that those are the two bits of API docs that needed to be updated. Yeah. All right. So yeah, I'll do that afterwards. Okay. So let me just. Yeah, well, in future streams, I'm hoping that there'll be even more collaboration and things like as we sort of get into the rhythm of this and we're doing more, then I think that drawing on the people's usage experience and how they've found things, I think will be very valuable. So yeah, hopefully there will be more co-authorship of commits from chat, and then if I'm running into these strange CI errors or something, if I am ever doing that on CI, maybe there's people who know more about compiling things on Windows than I do that can be helpful. So yeah, all right, I think we'll wrap that up for now. As I said, I've got these a bunch of these technical issues to sort out with the stream so that I can actually share the browser and just make things a little bit nicer. So yeah, but I think this is good for today, and hopefully by tomorrow I'll have some of these things sorted out and improved. So yeah. Cool. All right, so I will sign off.